From the News Channel 5 Network, this is SportsLine.
Hey there, SportsLine on your television. Steve Layman here with you. Glad you are here with us tonight on News Channel 5. Plus, Titans, like everybody else in the NFL today, cutting down their roster. Titans ultimately over the last couple of days bidding adieu to 29 different guys. We talked yesterday about the decision to part ways with longtime punter Brett Kern, the longest tenured Titan after 13 seasons. He's got pretty much every franchise record when it comes to punting, but they're moving on in the direction of rookie Ryan Stonehouse at that position. We'll find out where Kern ultimately ends up now. At 36, certainly can still punt, but the Titans going in a younger and cheaper direction with a guy who has a massive leg in Stonehouse. Today we saw the rest of the cuts as they went from what was an 80-man roster over the weekend when they took on the Cardinals on Saturday down to the 53-man roster that you have to start the regular season with. Of course, some of these guys that got cut will have to go back through waivers, and if they make it through waivers, they'll be able to come back to Tennessee as part of the practice squad. You got 16 guys on the practice squad, so you'll get back to ultimately 69 guys in the building. But there were some surprises today for sure. One of them right off the top, David Anini, a linebacker who did just about everything you could ask of him during the preseason. He had 3 sacks, certainly showed that he can rush the passer. He gets cut today, and he's a guy that I think is going to be a candidate to land elsewhere. When you show the ability to get to the quarterback in this league, that's very attractive to teams. And the Titans maybe don't need a lot of it right now because they've got Harold Landry and Bud Dupree and Rashad Weaver and Ola Adeni. Those guys all can get to the quarterback. So maybe they don't feel like they need Anini. He's a guy I'm sure they'd love to get back on the practice squad, but I don't think they're going to have that opportunity based off of what he did in the preseason. Running back Trenton Cannon was cut. Safety Adrian Colbert, a veteran that they brought in, cut. Offensive lineman Christian DeLauro, who was on the practice squad last year, he was cut today. Wide receiver Dez Fitzpatrick, one of the bigger names talked about in this. He had a great offseason. According to everybody involved with the Titans, he did not have a great training camp. He was clearly not one of the locks on this roster. After last year, he was the 4th-round pick a year ago and had a miserable training camp a year ago in August. So much so that he was cut last year, and you almost never see a 4th-round pick cut in the year that he was drafted. But that's what you got last year. Fitzpatrick came back on the practice squad. He got some action late in the season. And again, coaches were high on what he did in the offseason work. But when it actually got down to it in training camp and in the preseason games, he just didn't perform. Even the other night, he had the game-winning touchdown in his arms on 3rd down, and he just dropped it. Just flat out dropped what could have been the game-winning touchdown. Of course, Logan Woodside scored on the next play to cap off that game-ending drive and give the Titans a feel-good moment there with the roster of 80, but Woodside also was cut today. A couple things about that. Woodside has been the backup and on the roster for the last couple of years. Maybe he makes it back to the practice squad. We'll see if there's any interest from around the league on the waiver wire for a guy who has been in the league and been active on game days for the last couple of seasons. But the other big story that comes along with that is the fact that the Titans are keeping just 2 quarterbacks, and that means Malik Willis won the backup quarterback job in the preseason, just as we talked about, and frankly, what I expected. I think what Malik Willis did over the weekend against the Cardinals showed that he is capable of being the backup. As we've talked about on multiple occasions, if Ryan Tannehill goes down this year, the Titans are going to be in trouble because he's far and away the best quarterback on the roster right now. And he is a leader of this team. If he goes down, the Titans have real problems. But I do think that Malik Willis gives you a skill set at that backup position that maybe allows you to do a couple different things. He has arm talent. he seemed to improve throughout the preseason in terms of his decision-making and how quickly he was able to get to the right read. But what you saw Saturday night was what he does that separates himself. That 50-yard run, the zone read, the extension of the play to come up with a big play and pass to Racey McMath. Those are the types of things that Logan Woodside can't do. And if you're going to take a step back, if Ryan Tannehill gets hurt, and you just are, whoever the backup quarterback is on this roster isn't going to be anything like what you're getting from Ryan Tannehill, at least this year. But if you're going to take that step back, at least go with the guy who can be spectacular. Go with the guy who can continue to grow and may ultimately work himself into a starting job. And that's Malik Willis. It's not Logan Woodside. They knew what they had in Logan Woodside. They're still finding out what they can ultimately have in Malik Willis. And so if there is an injury, and again, if you're a Titans fan, you're knocking on wood to make sure that Ryan Tannehill doesn't get injured, because that could be disastrous for this season. But if it happens, you got to send the young kid out there and see what he is capable of doing in the NFL, and that is the decision that the Titans made. Jack Gibbons impressed a lot of people with his play during training camp, just really understands what the Titans are looking for defensively, but he was cut today. He's a guy that they would love to have back on the practice squad, and we'll see. I think there's a pretty good likelihood he's going to make it through the waiver wire, which probably means he will be back here on the practice squad. Tyree Gillespie, one of the guys that they brought in to try to find some depth in the secondary. He was released yesterday along with Brett Kern. Cody Hollister, been around working with this team for the last couple of years. He was released. Offensive lineman Hayden Howerton, Willie Wright, we told you about them yesterday. Couple of interesting defensive backs here. Chris Jackson, who was a 2020 7th-round pick, has been a part of this roster the last 2 years. He gets waived today, as does Theo Jackson, the Overton standout, and then Vol for life. Had an opportunity here in Tennessee, but it did not last. We'll see what the future is for Theo Jackson. Would he come back on the practice squad? We'll find out, but the Overton standout was released today, as was Joe Jones, linebacker, who played a lot, impressed with his knowledge of the game, with his hustle and effort, and with what he can do on special teams, but he did not make the 53-man today. Wide receiver Mason Kinsey was cut. Greg Maben, who's been active in the past, was cut. Jalen McKenzie, and then Laurel Murchison, another 2020 draft pick, released today by the Titans. And what that means is all the draft picks in 2020, and we know Isaiah Wilson, the first-round pick. We know all the problems there. All of the draft picks in 2020, there are just 2 left on this team. Just 2. Out of everybody that John Robinson drafted in that 2020 year. And that's pretty amazing. And if you're John Robinson, I think you just have to blame it on COVID. You just have to say that everything was different. We couldn't go visit these guys. We couldn't get to them in person. It was just hard to make the evaluations because that draft was dreadful. And he's been better than that for most of his tenure as GM. I think this year's draft class already shows way more potential than what you've seen from the last couple. His earlier draft classes had much better success. Obviously, he's built a team that has won every year that he's been in Tennessee. So John Robinson has done a good job, but the 2020 draft class is not going to be one that he puts on his resume. And so if I'm J-Rob, I just look at anybody who ever asked and just said COVID. It was COVID. You know, kind of like anything else out there in the world from 2020. You don't like how it went, just blame it on COVID, because it was weird, and it doesn't make sense why it was such a stinker for the Titans compared to other drafts. But it was absolutely a stinker, and they're still dealing with that at the moment. They're still trying to figure all of that out. Jalen McKenzie was cut. Xavier Newman-Johnson was cut up front. Thomas Odukoya, the tight end. Jordan Peavy on the defensive line, Reggie Roberson, wide receiver, Jordan Roos, who some people thought might make this roster as a backup offensive lineman. He was cut today, which means Jamarco Jones is on the roster despite the injury troubles he had in the preseason. Andrew Rupcich cut today. Trey Swilling, defensive back, cut. Tight end David Wells. And then Tommy Hudson, tight end, who's been on the roster the last couple of years. He was waived injured. So that's an injury designation. They'll come up with a settlement there. But for the moment, the Titans with just 3 tight ends on the active roster as we sit here tonight. Now, the flip side of the bad news for all of those guys that now wait to see if anyone claims them on the waiver wire or if maybe they come back to Tennessee on the practice squad, or maybe the dream, at least for this year, is done for some of those guys. It will certainly be the case for some guys who got bad news around the league today. Those guys wait. The flip side of that, though, is the guys who didn't get a call, didn't get a visit from the Reaper, and now are a part of a 53-man roster with salaries guaranteed for this season after the work they've done up to this point. The biggest surprise of all in that today for the Titans, Julius Chestnut, undrafted free agent out of Sacred Heart, came into a team with Derrick Henry and Dontrell Hilliard, who the Titans like, and Hassan Haskins, who they drafted, and pretty much nobody thought there was room to keep another running back, especially when they're keeping Torrey Carter as a fullback on the roster. But Chestnut came in, he impressed, he worked hard, he ran hard, he got some opportunities, he made the most of them. And think about this, one of his first carries of the preseason in Baltimore was a costly fumble that led to a Ravens touchdown. But he just kept working. He kept making the most of the opportunities. He ended up as the Titans' leading rusher in the preseason and with a roster spot. The 5th running back, if you include Carter, 4th tailback on this roster, along with Henry, Hilliard, and Haskins. Julius Chestnut making the most of an opportunity, and one of the good news stories on a day like today. And we got a chance to catch up with him after the game on Saturday night when he scored a touchdown, got into the end zone for the first time in his NFL career, albeit the preseason. And we got to ask him, what do you think about this performance? Was it enough? Are you going to be here? Are you going to stick around? And here was Julius Chestnut after the game.
Carries for you as the preseason went on. How much more confidence do you have going into the NFL season?
A lot of confidence, and that's just built off of the trust of the coaches and the O-line doing what they do. Me being able to do what I do it comes from everybody. They always say it takes all 11, so it's from the coaches giving me the opportunity, and the O-line just doing what they do.
And do you feel like you've done enough in these 3 preseason games as well as training camp to earn a spot on this roster?
I really don't know, but whatever we see down the road is what happened.
From that early fumble in Baltimore, to tonight, getting the end zone and what you did out there, how pleased are you with the progress you made over those couple of weeks?
I wouldn't say pleased just because it happened, but I know my ability and I know what I'm capable of. So that something like that is not supposed to happen. And just like I said before, the coaches putting trust in me and putting me back on the field is truly a blessing. And being able to be here is also a blessing. So just me, I know what I'm capable of. So. Just going out there and playing every play.
To actually get in the end zone tonight, pretty special moment for you?
Absolutely. First touchdown ever in the NFL, it should be a blessing. So it was a very special moment. I still got my football, so I'm gonna take it home.
Do you think, in terms of what you tried to show tonight, do you think you did that? And what were you trying to show them?
Honestly, show I can play on special teams. I was out there on every special teams, and the coaches put me out there just so I'm not just an offensive runner, and I'm capable of being versatile and playing special teams. I can try to make tackles, sprint down and kick off if I need to, kick off return. I can block somebody. I'm not pleased. I wouldn't say I'm not pleased, but I'm not satisfied, but still just capable of doing everything I can just to be on the team.
Julius Chestnut, one of the feel-good stories from training camp in the preseason, and a feel-good story today on Cut Day with his NFL dreams being realized. Again, undrafted free agent out of Sacred Heart. Really cool story there, and you certainly wish him the best of luck as he fills in a role here on this Titans team. He did show on Saturday night that he can play special teams. You got to think that went a long way in the decision-making process for Mike Vrabel and John Robinson, because he's not going to get a lot of carries. Derrick Henry back in the regular season. So he's going to have to find a role in another space, and apparently he showed them he's capable of doing that. On the defensive side, Trey Avery, probably the biggest surprise, sticking around at quarterback. He's obviously a depth guy for this team, but he did enough in the preseason to find a job. I don't know who even covered the Titans thought that was possible, given some of the other guys in the secondary, but Trey Avery sticking around. A couple extra defensive linemen, Deshaun Hand, Kevin Strong, both make this team. And then Ugo Amadi, the Overton standout, much like Theo Jackson, who we talked about earlier. He's played around in the league, though. He gets traded from Seattle to Nashville last week, has to come in, learn a bunch of things on the fly, and prove that trade was worth the Titans' efforts, and prove that he belongs here. And he apparently did enough in less than a week's time to find himself on this roster. The Titans have been looking for some defensive back depth, guys that they can trust to be on the field when they need to have 5 or 6 DBs on the field, as is often the case in the NFL. Ugo Amadi fits that type of role, or fits that type of bill, it seems. We'll see how that plays out and what his role ultimately is, but at least for now, Ugo Amadi is part of the Titans' 53-man roster. Our phone lines are open, 737-7767. If you'd like to give us a call and give us your take on the Titans' cuts, on what this 53-man roster looks like and what you expect for this season. Love to talk to you tonight. Again, 737-7767. This is SportsLine on News Channel 5+.